We introduced this next question in John 18. We're looking at questions Jesus asked. And I was thinking, I was going to say 6, but I think it may be 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions remain in this study. But as we look at this next question in John 18, Jesus is before Pilate, and our question actually occurs in 18:34. We got the context last week, just leading right up to the question, and so of course Pilate has asked Jesus a question, and I've said before, at some point we'll probably go back and do a study of questions that others. That humans asked Jesus. It's an interesting study as well. This list of questions was compiled by my father-in-law, Roger Campbell, and he also, I think he did this study at Greens Lake Road when he was preaching there, and then he went back. I don't remember which came first, but he also did a study of questions that others asked Jesus. I'm going to hold off probably on that. I won't go back to back into those because there would be at least some overlap. So we'll come back to that at some point because there are a list of a number of questions that folks asked Jesus, and there's a lot we learn from the questions that he asked to others. There's a lot we learn from questions that humans asked him, and seeing how he answered those questions, and this was pointed out, I want to say last year, Rob Whitaker pointing out that it's striking how often when Jesus is asked a question, he does not directly answer the question. How it's pretty rare that he just gave a direct answer. Sometimes he would return with a question. We've seen that in our Questions Jesus Asked series. Sometimes he would point them to a scripture and so on. But that's an interesting study as well that we'll go back, Lord willing, at some point and look at that. But having gotten the context, and I don't want to just repeat all that from last week, but picking up at 33, Pilate entered into the judgment hall again. This again is a praetorium, we would say. And he called Jesus and said unto him, and here's his question to Jesus, art thou the king of the Jews? Are you the king of the Jews? That's the accusation they've made against him. They're going to try to use that to put Pilate sort of in a conundrum. Oh, if you release this man, you're no friend of Caesar because he says he's a king. And so he wants to know, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered him, sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? So there's the next question we're looking at is right there in verse 34. Of course, this is spoken to Pilate. Jesus is on trial. We use that term very loosely. This is not really much of a trial. It's a farce of a trial. Illegal in so many aspects, in every aspect as far as Jewish law goes. But Jesus answers Pilate when he says, are you the king of the Jews? He says, well, are you saying this because you believe that? Are you saying this out of yourself, or somebody tell you that? And when you look at verse 35, it seems that Pilate gets a little bit huffy, snippy with him. It's sometimes it's hard to say for sure when you're reading and you don't have the nonverbals, but it seems like he's a little bit off-put by Jesus' question. Let me get somebody, if you would. Robert, do you mind grabbing Luke 23, 1 and 2? But Pilate, he answers back with a question. Am I a Jew? Thine own nation, the chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? Hey, I'm not one of your people. And you know, we've talked about it a lot. You probably know this from your own studies. The Jews and the Romans did not always get along. That's not always the case, kind of like Jews and Samaritans, but typically they did not. The Jews did not like being ruled by pagan Rome. The Romans tended not to like the Jews because the Jews were kind of infamous for not being very submissive to Roman rule. Some cities, cultures were conquered by Rome, and they were kind of all in, like, yeah, we're part of Rome. And they were thankful for that because there were, of course, many times benefits that came as being a part of Rome. You had protection and things like that. But then there were other people, and probably none more so than the Jews, that they viewed it as an absolute abomination. And you had zealots who would engage in guerrilla tactics, sometimes attacking Roman officials, things like that. They would encourage insurgency. And sometimes, as you know, even to this day, there might be a group. The Zealots were not like this huge faction of the Jews. They were probably one of the smaller ones. And yet, sometimes a little small group can cause an outsider to see and judge the entire group by them. And that's what sometimes happened with the Romans. Oh, those Jews, they're always rebelling. Well, some of the Jews understood. They sort of took their lumps. Well, you know, we were this independent nation, and we were very wealthy, very powerful, prestigious, you know, in the days of David and Solomon, and even some of the other kings after the division of the kingdom into the north and the south. But because of their idolatry, their disobedience to God, failure to keep the Sabbath as God had commanded them, the northern kingdom fell, and around 150 or so years later, the southern kingdom fell. And a lot of the Jews understood that, and they said, this is kind of our own doing, you know, the sins of our fathers, and we're not bearing the guilt of our fathers' sins, but we do sometimes suffer consequences because of an earlier generation's sins. But then you had the Zealots who were kind of like, no, we're going to rebel, join us, and let's fight against Rome because, boy, they're just pagan dog Romans. So sometimes the Romans tended to look at the Jews in general based upon the actions of those few, the Zealots. And again, you sense a little bit of that. I do a little, and I freely admit that I don't know this for sure, but it just seems like a little bit of that maybe in Pilate's answer. Hey, look, I'm not one of your people. Am I a Jew? Am I one of your folks? Your own nation, your own chief priest delivered you to me. So what have you done? And of course, Jesus answers John 18:36, and this really answers Pilate's question. Again, you see here where you have a question asked of Jesus by a human, but not a direct answer. In fact, Jesus answers with a question, and then Pilate responds with a question, and now Jesus sort of, in a roundabout way, answers this question. Robert, you got that, Luke 23, 1 and 2.
Yes. And the whole multitude of them arose and led him unto Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ the King.
All right, so put that with 29 and 30 right here in John 18. Pilate goes out with them. And he says, what accusation do you bring against the man? Well, they brought him to Pilate, so you can't just bring somebody without any cause, of course. So what's the problem here, he says. And their answer here is, we talked a little bit about this last week, hey, look, if he weren't guilty, we wouldn't have brought him to you. And boy, isn't that an answer. It's kind of like, you know, two children, siblings. One of them may say, you know, hey, Mom, John over here, he needs a whooping. He needs to be in trouble. Well, why? Well, don't worry about that. If he hadn't done something wrong, I wouldn't be telling you this. And sometimes people will do that, even in other situations, maybe in the workplace, maybe in other situations, where somebody says, hey, something needs to happen to somebody over here, and they're trying to get something bad happen, get them in trouble, whatever. Well, what's the deal? I'm trying to get more information. You don't worry about the details. I mean, just trust me. I wouldn't be bringing this to you if it weren't legit. And that's sort of the answer that they give Pilate here. Now, you put that with Luke 23, 1 and 2, They say, oh, he's perverting the nation. Well, okay, good. I was worried they were going to be vague about it. Well, that's a very vague statement, perverting the nation. And Paul's going to face some of this same type of thing when they try to get Paul in trouble with the Roman government. In fact, they were so incensed, latter part of Acts, that they probably would have killed Paul had the Roman chief captain not gone down with a centurion and soldiers and broken that up and rescued Paul. But they kind of say of Paul, well, he's stirring up trouble, perverting the nation. Well, that's so vague. But then they get a little more specific there in Luke 23, 1-2, and they say, oh, he's forbidding people to pay tribute to Caesar. Now, was that true? That was a blatant lie, because they had asked him about that. They thought they could get him in trouble with this whole, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? And they really thought they had him in a situation where it was a no-win situation, because if he says, no, don't pay your taxes, then yeah, Rome's going to be very upset about that. But if he says, oh no, you need to pay your taxes to Rome, well, then they think, well, we'll have him in trouble with the people, because they don't like to pay their taxes. Even the rank and file Jew, so to speak, they didn't like to pay taxes, and they viewed that as abominable, a faithful Jew, because I'm giving money to this pagan nation, idolatrous people. But of course, Jesus says, show me a coin. Whose image is this? Oh, that's Caesar's image. Well, you render to Caesar what's Caesar's, and you render to God what's God's. And they don't have a reply to that. But they just trump up this accusation that is completely false, and they say, oh, he's perverting the nation, forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, and oh, by the way, he's making himself out to be a king. And they know that gets Rome's attention. And so Pilate wants to know, well, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus asks, well, did you say this of yourself, or did somebody else tell you? And that's when Pilate responds with verse 35, I'm not one of your people. Your own nation, chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? And then Jesus says, verse 36, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence, not from here, this earth. So, you put that statement with Mark 15, verse 2, where Pilate says to Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And he answers, the old King James has it, thou sayest. I think it's thou sayest it. The New King James and other more modern versions have it a little more as we would say it. It is as you say. So you can almost picture when he answers it first, and it would seem to be that was the first answer that he gave when he actually answers this question from Pilate. It is as you say. And you can almost see Pilate kind of go like, oh, really? Because again, that gets Rome's attention. Anybody that starts talking about being a king, and here's Pilate, and we don't have time to get into a whole lot of history with Pilate, but Pilate has a history. He's on shaky ground with Caesar. He's gotten sideways of Caesar a little bit, and so he's a little bit cautious. And you can imagine where somebody who would claim to be a king, perhaps if it's a different situation, he might just kind of blow that off. And I'm not saying all this to justify Pilate. Pilate made a choice. But I'm just saying we begin to understand a little bit. But here's Pilate. He's been in trouble with Caesar before. He's managed to hang on to his position for now. He doesn't want any trouble with the capital. So, are you the king of the Jews? Well, it is as you say. Oh, really? And then Jesus makes this statement, look, my kingdom is not of this world. And You talk about one of those statements in Scripture, especially from Jesus, that is very reserved and meek. This is one of them in verse 36. He says, if my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. You know, you and I might be tempted in that situation to say, let me tell you something, Pilate. If my kingdom were of this world, you would know it. You and all of Rome and all the world would know it. Because I would say the word. I would just have to think it. And the skies would be split open, and there would be angels upon you, more than you could count. And one of them would take out your entire Roman forces. So let me tell you, you'd know it if my kingdom were of this world. But Jesus doesn't. He just simply says, if my kingdom were of this world, then my servants might be inclined to fight. But to paraphrase a little bit, he says, let me put your mind at ease, Pilate. My kingdom, it's not of this earth. And so Pilate says to him, are you a king then? Jesus answered, thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. I said it backwards a while ago. I'm inclined to think that the answer in Mark 15 came second. I said first. I did say first, didn't I? I think I got that backwards. But anyways, it seems most likely that answer came second, after he's given this kind of disclaimer. Let me just tell you, my kingdom is not of this world. But yes, it is, as you say, I am a king, but not an earthly king. And that itself is ironic, because people to this day think often that Jesus is going to be some kind of an earthly king. And he says very clearly, my kingdom, it's not of this world. But he says, this is why I came forth. To this end, to this goal, to this purpose was I born. For this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. And everyone that's of the truth heareth my voice. Those who are of the truth hear me. And Pilate here, again, it's hard to say with certainty, and I've seen a few outliers, but most commentators and scholars think that the question from Pilate in verse 38 is very scoffing. Just, you can almost picture him going, what is truth? And that's an idea that continues to this day among some people, that, well, what even is truth? Is truth objective? Is it something we can really know? Your truth, my truth? Is there even any real objective truth? And of course there is, and the Bible makes that very clear. Jesus made that very clear. But Pilate it's almost like when he hears this, that my kingdom's not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight, but it's not an earthly kingdom. However, yes, I am a king, as you have asked. And I came forth to bear witness to the truth, and everyone who's of the truth hears my voice. Pilate, realizing, okay, he's not some kind of a threat to Rome, just sort of, well, what is truth, Jesus? And then verse 38 tells us, when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews and saith unto them, I find in him no fault at all. Like, what are y'all doing? Why have y'all brought this man to me? I don't find any fault in him. And he says, you have a custom, I should release unto you one. At the Passover, will you therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? They cried then cried they all again, saying, not this man, Jesus, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Well, Pilate's kind of saying, I don't find anything wrong with Jesus. There's this tradition to release someone to you. He's got Barabbas, who was a robber. Other accounts tell us he was involved in an insurrection, committed murder. Here we find out he's a robber. He's quite the fellow, isn't he? And so it's almost like in Pilate's mind, this is a no-brainer. Well, I haven't found anything wrong in Jesus, so I'll tell you what, I've got this, you've brought him, you've laid these accusations on him, so we got to do something with that. but I have this tradition of releasing somebody, so I'll release unto you the King of the Jews. You can go home and everybody can, enjoy your Passover or whatever, and let's be done with this. And they said, no. We want Barabbas. And again, we learned from the other accounts that the leaders had stirred up the people. And if you've ever been in a situation like that, it doesn't even take a huge mob of people to get mob mentality. And when that starts happening, and you have people that are very cunning, and they can stir up the crowd and sway it in the direction they want it to go, sometimes that happens. And so you have a bunch of people that are crying out for Pilate to release a murderous robber. And it's just, we read that and we kind of go, how is that even possible? But again, it's that kind of mob mentality. They've stirred up the people and got them doing that. So without going entirely through all of the crucifixion account, that's the last question Jesus asked, I believe. Let me make sure I'm right on that. Yes. Unless I'm missing one. I don't think I am. That's the last question Jesus asked before his death. The next question will put us all the way to chapter 20. Anything else on that before we jump over there? Yes, sir.
Pilate asked the birds, what is truth? Well, he thought he was a 21st century man. In our society right now, in our culture, if you follow government investigations and so forth, it takes 3, 4, 5 years to come to the truth about something that has happened in our culture. It seems to me we really don't care so much about truth, culturally speaking. I know working at the university, some professors were concerned about the truth. But some say you can't know the truth. I was teaching at a high school in Newton County. I had a girl named Tuesday. Now, I think it was Wednesday when she said it, but I was talking about truth, and she said, you can't know the truth. She was saying it like she heard it somewhere and wanted me to know, you can't know truth, and you can't know absolute truth. I go, okay, well, how sure are you believing you can't know truth? And she said, I'm absolutely sure. How can you be absolutely sure about not knowing something? Absolutely sure. So that tells me the nature of truth is a problem in our culture. The only problem that we have is you can know truth. Jesus says, sanctify them in the truth. Thy word is truth. Now, he could have been talking about religious truth, but if you could know religious truth, you could know other truth too. So it seems to me our culture is really messed up on this idea of truth. Of course, as a math teacher, you're always dealing with mathematical truth, and so maybe I have more of a desire to know that. But how important is that for teaching our young people you can know truth? What's going on in our culture politically? Has political power substituted for truth in our culture? What kind of 10-year influence will this have on our culture? How can we learn anything for sure? What's the idea of certainty? These are all really important issues that impact us. Maybe we're unaware of it or not self-conscious, but Pilate could have been a person in our society. What is truth? Like that girl telling me in my class.
Mm-hmm.
We can know truth, and we're obligated to the truth, regardless of what the culture has to say. And that's a big challenge for us in our culture.
There's, I don't remember, it's been a year or so ago, but I did a lesson talking about, we sometimes use the term postmodernism, but that's kind of a staple of the postmodern mindset, is the idea that, well, truth is relative. It's not like a fixed point. It can move around. You can have your truth and I can have mine, and who are you to tell me my truth is wrong? Who am I to tell you your truth is wrong? But truth is truth is truth. Cliff Goodwin's dad used to say that quite frequently. And I remember at his funeral several years ago that it was mentioned a number of times that was kind of one of his oft-repeated statements. He preached at Heflin for a number of years before his death, but he would often say that truth is truth is truth. My grandmother Campbell would often say, the truth will stand when the world's on fire. She loved that expression, and it's very true. And like you said, truth is very much objective. It's not something that is subjective. And when it comes to mathematics, we understand that. And when it comes to physics, and which of course involves a lot of mathematics and other areas of life, we understand that. But people start wanting to move that around when you get into the spiritual realm. But there is truth, and it is amazing how, as we sometimes say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because, as you pointed out, Bob, Pilate could have been a 21st century citizen of America or a number of other countries as well, I suppose, in this idea of, assuming he was. And again, I think there's pretty clear indication in the text he's scoffing, but this idea of what is truth. God's word is truth, and when it comes to spiritual matters, that's our answer. And it stood the test of time. It's not just, it's one thing to make that statement. And again, we don't have time to go. We spend entire classes on evidence of the Bible's inspiration, but there's no other logical answer for the Bible except that it is inspired of God. And if it is, then what it says is right, and it tells us we can know the truth, and that truth will make us free. All right, so let's jump to chapter 20 and get the context for this next question. So, of course, you have Jesus. Pilate takes Jesus, scourges him. He'll put forth a little effort, not a whole lot. Ultimately, the buck stopped with Pilate, and he did not release Jesus. And so, again, all of what we've said is not to excuse him, but just to help us to understand, because there's a big section in R.C. Foster's book, Studies in the Life of Christ, a pretty significant section that he spends on talking about, well, who crucified Jesus. Sometimes people get upset if you say the Jews crucified Jesus, and they try to turn that into anti-Semitism or something like that. Well, who crucified Jesus? Were the Jews to blame? Absolutely. That's not anti-Semitism, because any more than to say, if somebody in our country, in government, in authority, had wrongly put someone to death, and here we go, 200-300 years down the road, and we look back in hindsight and we say, well, the Americans killed that person. Citizens of the United States, they killed that person. Well, that would be accurate. That's not an anti-U.S. statement. That's just stating the fact. Were the Jews responsible? Yes. Did Pilate share in the blame? Absolutely. He absolutely did. Herod, the chief priest, the high priest. Well, what about us? And of course, he was crucified for the sins of mankind. That means you and I bear part of the blame for that as well. So it's an interesting discussion that Foster has, and I'd encourage you to check that out sometime. Like I said, it's pretty, he spends several pages talking about that, especially how people push back against that when you point that out and try to turn it into something that it's not, saying it's anti-Semitism or something. All right, so getting into chapter 20, of course, Jesus, he's crucified, he's in the tomb 3 days. It's not, what is that? I'm terrible at math in my head, Bob. 72 hours, 3 days? It's not an entire 72-hour period. He's crucified Friday, sometime morning. He's on the cross for some 6 hours. They come to the thieves on either side, break their legs. They come to Jesus. They realize he's dead already. They don't break his legs. These are Roman, or is a Roman centurion. These are Roman soldiers. They're not looking at prophecies and going, oh, wait, don't break his legs. That would violate a prophecy that was prophesied. Not a bone will be broken. Remember the Passover lamb? Not a bone was to be broken. And it's prophesied in the Psalms. These are pagans. They're not trying to fulfill prophecy. The Jews, in another twist of irony, they want them to hurry up and get the bodies off the cross lest they defile the Passover. They're crucifying, they're sacrificing the Passover lamb at that very moment. But they come to Jesus, they find he's dead already, so they take him down. Joseph of Arimathea goes and asks for the body. Pilate grants it. And it's interesting, by the way, that Pilate suddenly decides to have a spine when he does give the consent for Jesus to be crucified. Here it is, verse 19 of chapter 19. Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross. The writing was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And so many of the Jews read that, verse 20 tells us, written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Then the chief priests come to Pilate and they say, write not the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am the King of the Jews. And now Pilate decides to have some backbone, and he says, hey, what I have written, I've written. Hey, leave me alone. I'm not changing anything. And that's kind of ironic to me too, because he had just given in before. So Joseph comes, and of course John's account tells us that Nicodemus comes as well and helps, and they bury Jesus. So he's in the tomb part of Friday, all of Saturday, and then very early Sunday he's going to rise from the dead. And we've answered this before in another place. Sometimes people say, well, that's not 3 days. Well, a portion of the day counts. We do this sometimes with vacations. Somebody may say, we're going to give away a 3-day vacation. And then you find out, oh, you can't check in until like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday. And, by the way, you have to be gone by, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock on the morning of the 3rd day. But it's a piece of those days. They call it a 3-day vacation. But you see it in the Bible as well. Rehoboam, when he became king, Solomon's son, the people come to him, make things easier on us, and we'll serve you. Rehoboam went and asked advice of the older men. They said, do it. They'll serve you faithfully. He asked advice of the younger men, more like his peers. They said, oh, I'd tell them you ain't seen nothing yet. I'm going to be worse than my father. He foolishly listened to them. But he had told them, come back after 3 days, and I'll give you an answer. And the Bible says on the 3rd day they came back. And so he didn't say, whoa, I told you after 3 days. It was a portion of those days. So there's no contradiction there, no discrepancy. But when you get to the resurrection, Mary Magdalene comes early. Chapter 20, verse 1, it was yet dark, so it hasn't even gotten daylight yet. She comes to the sepulcher, and she finds the stone taken away. She runs, comes to Simon Peter, to the other disciple whom Jesus loved. That'd be John, of course. Saith unto them, they've taken away the Lord out of the sepulcher. We know not where they have laid him. Peter therefore went forth, and that other disciple, John, came to the sepulcher. And in what is a humorous twist, to me at least, they ran both together, and the other disciple did outrun Peter. Who's writing this account? John. He notes how he outran Peter. Now, Peter might say, well, of course he did. He's a lot younger than I am. There was a significant age difference between them, or at least a number of years that would make that understandable. John, of course, is going to live many years longer. Peter's going to be martyred, of course, as well. But he outran Peter. He came first to the sepulcher. He, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen clothes lying, yet went he not in. Then cometh Simon Peter following him, and went into the sepulcher, and seeth the linen clothes lie, and the napkin that was about his head not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. And that's interesting for a number of reasons. There are indications in the Greek words used here for when it says Simon Peter comes in and he sees. In other words, he's closely examining. So there's a Greek word for you to see something, and then there's a Greek word for you really closely. Let me really examine this, and that's what he does here. But also in that the napkin that was about his head, it's not lying with the linen clothes, but it's wrapped together in a place by itself. That is significant because some people are going to say, oh, Jesus' disciples came and they stole the body, which is ridiculous because there was a guard of at least 16 soldiers there at any given moment. Possibly, I think the numbers range, scholars will say anywhere from 8. I said at least 16. I think it's maybe like 8 to as many as 24 or so, something like that. So you're going to tell me that this ragtag group of fishermen and such, tax collector and all that, they overpowered these Roman soldiers, the best in the world, mind you, and took the body. Oh, somebody says, but the soldiers, they fell asleep. Well, that was illegal. Again, these are the best soldiers in the world, and if you fell asleep on duty and your prisoner or whoever you're guarding was taken away, it was your life or theirs. They know that. Highly unlikely that they fall asleep. But I'm going to tell you something. If you get there and you're those disciples and you manage to open that tomb, you get the stone rolled back, which, if you remember, we've studied this before, those disc closures, they would be placed on an incline so that it's far more difficult to open because not all grave robbers are humans. So you don't want animals getting in there and devouring your loved one's body. So they would fix it so that closed was the normal position. And to open it, you had to actually go up slightly what was already a very heavy stone. So if they managed to open that up and not wake up these soldiers who supposedly are all asleep at the same time, they all just managed to fall asleep at the exact same time. But you go in there, maybe you got a few of the disciples hold the stone, one of them slips in, they get it open just enough, he slips in, and he's like, all right, he gets the body. Oh, wait, I got to go back. Let me get that napkin that was about his face, and I want to make sure I carefully fold this and put it over here by itself. Now, does that make sense if you're in there stealing a body? Oh, but some people will say, well, his enemies took the body. And so maybe they bribed the soldiers or whatever. But again, if you're stealing the body, you say, now, guys, be sure. You take that napkin that was about his face, fold it up neatly, put it over there by itself. It just doesn't add up. So it's another one of those subtle evidences that confirms the resurrection. So then went in also that other disciple, verse 8 says, which came first to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed. For as yet they knew not the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. Then the disciples went away again to their own home. And here's the context of our next question, which is, of course, verse 15. Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping. And as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre. Now she sees two angels in white sitting. Verse 12 tells us, one at the head, other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And they say unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? She saith unto them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him. And when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. And I believe we have studied before, why did she not know that it was Jesus? Well, we're not told. It could be like on the road to Emmaus. Jesus kept himself from being known to those men until he was ready. Could be that. Some have speculated. I don't remember if it was Foster in his book, or it might be something I read from Wayne Jackson one time. Said, she's weeping. So it might be their eyes are, filled with tears and she's not seeing well. I don't know. That's possible. It doesn't seem to me to be the most likely. But she doesn't know him. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? And there's our question. Whom seekest thou? Really, two questions here in one. She, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. So he says, Woman, and New King James has it as, Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? So he asked this to Mary. This is Mary Magdalene, of course. We know that from verse 1 of the chapter. She's the first one to see Jesus after his resurrection. Mark 16, verse 9 tells us. So she explains to the angels why she's weeping. She thought the body of Jesus had been taken off by someone, and she didn't know where they'd put it. They had rested the Sabbath day. I think it's Mark's account that tells us that. And they came back to anoint the body with spices and things like that. Of course, they don't have the modern day embalming, so they're going to put very fragrant spices and things like that on the body. And she's kind of like, well, where did they take him? She's thinking somebody has moved the body. She doesn't know why, she doesn't know where, and so that's why she's upset. She thought Jesus was the gardener. You see that there in verse 15. She supposed him to be the gardener. And she doesn't know this is Jesus, of course. We've been told that already. So she shows some faith. She shows some courage in asking for the body. This is someone who's just been put to death, so someone might be afraid to ask much about it, but she just boldly says, hey, tell me where you've laid him, and I'll take him away. But don't just move the body. So you see some faith and courage on the part of Mary. But then in verse 16, Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself and saith unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. Some people have said that, maybe she didn't recognize Jesus until he spoke, but he did speak to her in verse 15, so I don't know that again, is the most likely. It seems to me most likely that he has kept her from knowing until he's ready. And at this moment, he's ready for her to know it's him. And so he simply says, Mary. And, we all have someone that is very near and dear to us. And they could just say our name. And there's a way that they say our name. And I mean, you might not have otherwise recognized them, but they say that, and you recognize. And that seems to be kind of what happens here. He says, Mary. And you can almost just hear the compassion. She's weeping. Where have they placed the body? Just tell me where it is, and I'll go. I'll get him and bring the body back, or whatever I need to do. And he just says, Mary. And just imagine the excitement that she must have felt when she realizes, wait a minute, this is no gardener. It is the Master of the Lord. And so Jesus says to her, verse 17, touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. Our Father, in other words. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things unto her. He says to her, touch me not, and that's not necessarily the best translation as far as how we would say that. I'll just end on this, that to say the idea there from the Greek is don't cling to me. He's not saying, hey, you can't touch me, because other times people are. In fact, he's going to tell Thomas, touch my hand. Put your hand into my side and see. Be not faithless, but believing. It's not that they can't touch him. He's saying, don't cling to me, because I'm only here for just a little bit, and I'm going to be ascending back to the Father. God willing, I'll be gone next week, but God willing, in 2 weeks, we'll get to these final, I think it's 4 questions, but especially of interest to me is in chapter 21, where Peter is restored. And man, that is a rich study, and I can't wait to go through that. Yes, sir?
Read Romans 12 next Sunday.
Romans 12. Bob says if you would, read Romans 12, getting ready for next Sunday's auditorium Bible class. Thank y'all so much. We'll have a break before worship.